Hey everyone, welcome back to Chris and Cameras. Today we're going to be looking at a legend in photography, the Canon 50mm 0.95, also known as the Dream lens. This beast of a lens has a 0.95 aperture, so that means insane bokeh, incredible low light performance, and also a ton of character. Also, today we're going to be comparing it just minimally to the 50mm Noctilux f1 version 3 and the TT Artisan 50mm 0.95 titanium edition. So Canon released this lens in the early 1960s as a response to what we'll call the speed wars, where many manufacturers were racing to have the largest aperture lens. I believe around this time, if I'm incorrect, please correct me below in the comments. I'd greatly appreciate that. Leica came out with their Noctilux 1.2, which at the time was revolutionary. You have to realize that most ISO, or back then ASA, was like 64. I think at the most you had was like 100 to 200. So having a lens with, let's say, even 1.4 was huge for photographers back then, especially if you don't want to get any blurry images and if you want to capture things later in the evening. So eventually Canon broke the record and had the world's fastest lens with this. And soon after, as you know, Leica released their Noctilux f1, for which at the time Canon remained the king at 0.95. This lens is also known as the Dream lens, and for good reason. The images this lens produces are, one could just call it art. There's no other way to describe it. When you look at images produced by this lens, especially at 0.95, it is incredibly artistic. There's no other way to put it. The images are very soft while retaining a bit of sharpness, and they have a bit of, how would you say this, almost a surreal look to it. And this really inspires people to create, to take more creative photographs. And this magic happens mostly at 0.95 at its limit. When you start stopping down at 1.4, you're getting more, we'd say, contemporary images, more sharp, more corrected. But this lens originally came out with a Canon Bayonet mount specifically for their rangefinder cameras. There were two versions released. The Canon TV lens, which I believe was used mainly for cinematic things, and then you had the regular version, which doesn't say Canon TV lens on it, which I believe were mostly for photography, but you could use both on the Canon Bayonet mount. I'm not exactly sure how many copies of this lens were produced, and they are relatively rare because, one, they're not made anymore, and two, you could only buy them used. And three, you could only find them in specific places such as eBay, Fred Miranda, but mostly your best bet would be eBay. Some of them you will find them in their original bayonet mounts. Mine is actually converted to like an M mount. So later on in the video, we're going to be comparing it to the 50mm by TT Artisan and the Leica Noctilux f1. All right, let's get this lens on the spin stand. As we have here the Canon on the spinning stand. This thing is massive, even for the stand. It's going a bit slower just because how heavy it is. The distant marks are marked in white and also a neon orange, which is pretty unique to the Canon rangefinder lineup. These vintage lenses that were designed in the 50s and 60s were doing their own thing, and this particular color scheme was unique to Canon for the most part. Just before these lenses were released, Canon used to make mostly silver-bodied lenses, just as Leica did, but moving forward, they went in different directions. Here we have another angle of the Canon Dream lens. I set it at 1.4 specifically to show you just how much bigger 0.95 is than 1.4. And it has 7 elements within 5 groups. The closest minimum focus distance, rangefinder coupled, is 1 meter. So this is not a lens that you could get in as close as possible to your subjects. For comparison, we have here the Leica Noctilux f1 version 3 The Canon is much wider but shorter, and the Leica is taller but a bit slimmer. The Canon is actually a bit more center weighted on your body versus the Leica, which is a bit more front heavy due to it being longer. So in my opinion, the Canon has a better balance on an M body versus the Leica Noctilux. Here we could see a different angle just to show you how much shorter the Canon is. Also, you can see the coatings are a bit different. The Leica being, I believe, 1980s to 1990s coating technology versus the Canon having its 1960s coating technology. Usually that means that for flare resistance, the Leica is much better than the Canon. Here we have now the TT Artisan 50mm f/0.9 and the Canon Dream lens. Look how much taller the TT Artisan is versus the Canon. The main drawback about that is it is a much front heavier lens on the body. So it is a modern 50-0.95, but it is much front heavier. And for that part, it's a much more difficult lens to use and master. Versus the Canon, which is much center weighted on the body, making it much easier to use. Even with its long focus strobe, it's just a much easier lens to learn how to focus correctly at very wide apertures such as 0.95 or 1.4. Here we have a different angle of both lenses, and as we could see right off the bat, the TT Artisan has a rear element that protrudes much further than the Canon. Additionally, we could see that the TT Artisan is also a bit thinner. One last thing is that the coatings on the TT Artisan are of course extremely modern, as this lens only came out, I believe, 5 years ago. Please let me know in the comments if that's correct or incorrect. Meanwhile, the Canon came out almost more than 50 years ago. Hey, welcome back. So I hope you like those shots, because these are very novelty specialty lenses with higher prices. They're not readily available at most stores. I hope helps out some people decide between which lenses they want. For some people, size is most important. For some people, weight is most important. Now we're going to be talking about the conversion. I had mine converted to Leica M mount by DAG, run by Mr. Don Goldberg, and the process was very simple. You go onto his website, and on his website it says he still does it, and it shows the price, but instead of adding it to cart and buying it, you have to email him. Just send him an email, put on the subject line 50mm Canon 0.95 conversion, and just let him know in the email if you have any other questions about it, how long it would take, and Mr. Goldberg will get back to you as soon as possible, and please be patient with him. Most of the times he gets back to you within a few days. If you don't hear back from him within a week, send him up a follow-up email. He's a very busy guy. Most of these repair technicians, they're incredibly busy. There's not a lot of them, and they've received all types of lenses and work to get done. The current price for conversion is $545. This does not include shipping. You will have to pay for your own shipping too, and pay for the shipping back, so please have that in mind for the total price of the conversion. So I believe mine in total was closer to $650, so almost $100 more for shipping. You can find these lenses on eBay anywhere from $1,500 all the way up to $3,000. The more expensive they are, usually they might have the conversion already done for you, which would save you a lot of time. But for the most part, they come with the original Canon Bayonet mount, so you will have to get it converted if you do buy a Canon Bayonet model. So after you hear back from Mr. Goldberg, you pack it up and wrap it in bubble wrap, but make sure to use rubber bands. He really hates tape. And once you do that, just send it out to his address and expect for this lens to be gone for at least, at a minimum, 2 months. I waited 2.5 months for mine. Just an FYI, you won't hear from him. So just be aware that your lens is gonna get done, but you won't get any status updates or anything like that. If you're really nervous about it, try not to send him too many emails. Maybe give him a phone call just to see a quick status update. Rest assured that your lens will be done as quickly as possible and the best quality of craftsmanship possible. I was looking at different people who do this conversion. One is, I believe, Mr. Miyazaki from Japan, which you could get that done through Japan Camera Hunter. You contact him and tell him you want this conversion done and he'll take care of that. I don't know how much that costs because I didn't want to do international shipping. Mr. Goldberg at DAG is located in, I believe, Oregon, here in the United States. So obviously the other option is probably going to take longer than that. So if you're in a rush to get this converted, most likely DAG would be your best bet, but there are also probably other technicians that do this conversion that I'm not aware of. So please, do your due diligence in finding out what works best for you. Okay, now we're going to mount it onto my Leica MP film camera. Right, there we go. So that's how it looks on body. One important thing about it, once you get it on any Leica M body, is that, as you can see, I'm going to zoom in. Once you get it on, you can't get it off. It's pretty much stuck there. So now you're wondering, how do I get it off? What I do is I carry a toothpick with me and I stick the toothpick in there and press it down a bit. And luckily, this is a pretty easy button to press. Once you get the toothpick in there, it's not going to damage it. It comes right off. So remember, always carry a toothpick or something plastic and pointy to get that off, or else you're going to be stuck with it on. And let me tell you, this is a very hefty lens. We got the lens on. This thing is massive, but luckily it's not long. So if you could say that the camera has a center point of gravity right there, I'm guessing is where most of the thicker metal and the rear elements are located. So it rests basically most of the weight on the mount, making it actually very balanced lens for its size, versus the other options are much longer and causes them to dip forward. This is very, very balanced. Holding it like this is very easy to do. So actually very easy lens to use. And the reason I asked DAG to make this as loose as possible is that this has a very long focus throw, which is great and bad. Great because you could get that precise focusing, which at 0.95 you're gonna need. Bad because, as you could see, it goes a long way. I don't know how many degrees, but I'm guessing that's at least more than half, so more than 180. So you're gonna be doing a lot of finger exercise, hand exercise. This being a huge lens, look at that front element. That could easily get scratched up. And these coatings of these older lenses are much more sensitive, are much more weaker. I would highly recommend you get a filter for this, just to make sure that your pristine lens stays nice. But that's just a recommendation from me. I know some people do not like filters at all, and that's fine. One thing about the filter size, it's a 72mm, so luckily that's very common. Most Canon EF lenses, the larger ones, I believe are 72mm, around there. So this won't be hard to find. It will be a bit expensive, but hey, at least it's not like other lenses with awkward filter size. One last thing about it, when you set it down, it's offset. Your camera does not lay flat. Not even the like M11P or any of the newer M10 models, M9 models. This lens is just that huge. If you decide to go with DAG for the conversion, Mr. Goldberg on his website offers the Canon 72mm lens cap. I think it's $7 or $8. Additionally, he also offers a lens hood that fits, it screws on. It's very nice. I don't know if it's Canon brand. I bought it just in case. I think it was $10 or $15. because finding the original lens hood and the original lens cap, you could find them, but they're pretty expensive. You're going to spend an additional $100 to $300 just for those accessories. Please go ahead, but if you're more on a budget and want to make this purchase hurt the wallet less, then definitely consider that. Or the image quality on this lens is uncomparable to any other lens out there, at least for 35mm, or at least in the Leica world. Maybe one that might get close to it is the Noctilux line, but this thing really paints a different image, especially at 0.95. The shallow depth of field that this produces at 0.95 is like nothing I've ever seen, aside from medium format, but you know, that's a whole nother topic. For 35mm, 0.95 of this thing, it separates your subject from the background. And the bokeh that it does is incredibly breathtaking. If you've seen Claude Monet's work, the bokeh that this lens paints is very similar to that. That's my personal opinion, and I just find that type of image beautiful. At 0.95, this thing is decently sharp. It's not gonna be a modern lens by any comparison. It's not gonna be a Summilux, it's not gonna be a Zeiss. It's its own thing. But honestly, I've seen many samples online, and the sharpness, in my opinion, does vary by copies. I found that my copy is very sharp at 0.95. I don't know if that has to do with Mr. Goldberg's conversion, or possibly other people's lenses were not calibrated well or didn't have a CLA, so they might be a bit off. So please take that with a grain of salt. At 0.95, your images could be decently sharp for a lens from the 1960s and for something at 0.95. If you want ultimate sharpness at 0.95, the Noctilux 0.95, that would be your best bet. In my opinion, the best use of this lens is at 0.95. The portraits this thing takes are just incredible. Not only because they give a certain glow to your subject, but also the separation from subject and background, and just the bokeh, especially if you're taking something that's backlit with lights. It's just amazing. The main reason I got this lens is because I like to shoot in the evening, especially using natural lights. Once the light is gone after 6 p.m., I wanted something that would allow me to handheld shoot at night. You know, this lens allows me to do that. At 0.95, I'm able to hit around 160, 125 if I'm lucky. And the images would come out decently sharp, and they would have a certain look to it that just makes any picture you take with this, as its name is called, the dream lens, dreamy. Using this lens is a learning curve on its own. Specifically, focusing is very difficult at first, especially if you haven't used a 0.95 lens. If you thought focusing on a 1.4 Summilux was difficult, nailing 0.95 is gonna be something of a practice shootout, I guess you could say. Because film is so expensive now, not a lot of us can afford to just go out and practice getting good with this, especially because you gotta wait for your results. So my suggestion is, if you do get this lens and you get it converted to M mount, obviously, pop it onto a digital M, your M9, your M10, M11, and just practice. You will get there. I do not use EVFs at all. I like to, you know, part of the rangefinder experience, get the full manual, and I love the challenge of being able to try and focus at 0.95, because when you do nail that focus, it's so sweet. Another thing is, if you're gonna use this, make sure your strap is crossbody. Don't put it around your neck, because one, it's gonna bounce up like this, and this thing weighs, I don't know, over 2 pounds. And half an hour of this beating your stomach, you're gonna have bruises from that, and you can't tell your wife it was a workout. She's gonna think you got mugged or something. So my humble suggestion is make sure to wear this crossbody, and make sure you get a strap that is rated for this type of weight. Don't use the strap that comes with the body. Those are necessarily okay, but for lighter lenses. But once you get something this heavy and expensive, make sure you get a strap that you trust and that can handle the weight. Probably the biggest issue I've had with this lens was waiting for it to be converted. I was so excited when I got it in the mail, and I'm like, oh, now I gotta ship it out and wait another 2 to 3 months to get it converted. But trust me, it's worth it. Once you get this back and you can mount it on your M body, the sky's the limit. And also, being like a M mount, you can mount it on your Sony, your Fujifilm, whatever you want. That's what the M mount's about. It's about that flexibility to be able to mount it on whatever you want. So who is this lens for? I would say this lens is for someone who loves vintage character, who loves 0.95, who wants to shoot at night, who wants the artistic photographs or paintings, as I like to call them, and someone who just appreciates how marvelous this vintage engineering is. But also, this is a lens for someone who has a bit deeper pockets because it is pretty expensive. Expect to spend anywhere from, as I mentioned before, if you're lucky on eBay, you could find them at $1,500 all the way up to $3,000 already converted. Now, compared to the Noctilux F1, this is closer to $5,000. And then you have your more budget option, 0.95 TT Artisan at $700 new. If you're lucky, you could get these on the used market for $400. So if you're really on a budget, this wouldn't be the lens, but in my opinion, save up a bit and it'll be worth it. For the budget shooter that you don't want to spend $2,000, the TT Artisan 50 0.95 is a great alternative. I'll do a review later on this. And for the person who only wants to shoot Leica, obviously the Noctilux is there for you. The Canon 50mm f/0.95 is as much as a conversation piece as it is a tool. It's a lens with flaws and all, but at the end of the day, it paints pictures and it also takes sharp images. When you stop it down to f/5.6 and beyond, it renders just like a modern lens. So you have a nifty 50 with the power to inspire with artistic images and also take your more serious photographs that require that modern edge sharpness. It's a lens designed in an age where speed was something new and something that people aspired to get the shot, to look into the night, to create art, not just photographs. And it's as relevant as it was back then today. This is a lens that, in my opinion, at least once in your life you have to try. And if you're fortunate enough to be in the position to afford one, it's something I definitely recommend and something that would fit in your collection just fine. Thanks for watching. The Canon 50mm f/0.95 is truly a unique lens, and I'm so glad I got to share it with you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to Chris and Cameras for more gear deep dives, and hopefully soon, camera adventures where I will go out with my gear and take images. That's one of my main focuses, but being winter and it's pretty cold and miserable out most of the time during this part of the year, it's a bit more difficult to do. But let me know in the comments, what's your most unique lens in your collection right now? I'd love to know, and see you in the next one.